Hello, everyone. Welcome to our Concertmaster Roundtable presented by the Montclair Orchestra, the Orchestra for the Next Generation. And we're super privileged today to have as our guests David Kim, Concertmaster of the Philadelphia Orchestra, Frank Huang, Concertmaster of the New York Philharmonic, and Benjamin Bowman, Concertmaster at the Metropolitan Opera, like myself. And to be in such illustrious company, it's pretty rare, but one of the kind of side benefits of the current world situation that we're living in. And although there's so much with all your experience as performers and artists that we could speak about, I think you're also all extremely eloquent and intelligent as teachers. And so I'd like a lot of our discussion to center around that today. Speaking of the Orchestra for the Next Generation, the Montclair Orchestra incorporates a large number of our students from conservatories in the New York State area as our constituent performers. So, David, maybe we could start with you. What do you see these days in terms of conservatory training that might be different than when we were in school? What ways do you see students as possibly being better prepared for the orchestral profession when they emerge from school?
I wish I could say that I think it's better now than it was when I was in school, but
Hmm.
I feel like, well, I mean, it's been several decades, but I feel like in some cases, I feel like the orchestral training could be a little bit more in depth, a little bit more like mock auditions and getting the standard like 30 excerpts into the hands of the kids like from freshman year on. But I don't really see that happening. And it's good for us. I mean, we are asked. We go to big conservatories and give master classes and all that stuff. But I think Rice stands out as a really strong orchestral program. But I would not say that it's ideal at the moment. But eventually, the players I feel get what they need either through self motivation or it just kind of happens by just inertia as they get towards the real world. They have to kind of get up to speed.
Very interesting answer. I see you guys nodding your heads. Frank, I mean, I know from my own vantage point as a violinist, there's a tension at that age, right? Because you
Absolutely.
still have to kind of push your own solo playing far enough to acquire chops, um, general musical education, learning orchestral repertoire is, of course, part of that, but it's kind of difficult to bridge that gap sometimes. What are your
Absolutely.
thoughts?
Well, in school, for me, it was more about developing your style, your taste. Of course, working on technical proficiency, right? But learning, how you want music to be played, how you want music to sound, what your personal preferences. That's a big part of it. Developing taste. And I think a lot of the times in schools, orchestras, you need a fantastic conductor to motivate kids to enjoy orchestral music as much as we may enjoy it now. Um, a lot of kids are focused on like what chamber music competitions, um, or not even practicing in some cases. But I think learning how to appreciate music, and using that love of music to motivate yourself. That's something it's hard to learn in school.
Well, Ben, I mean, passing this to you now.
Yeah.
We as string players, we have a particular problem because for wind and brass players, the orchestral repertoire is their solo rep in a certain way. I mean, of course, they have solo pieces, but so much of what they aspire to play is in the symphonic literature. Whereas for a string player, it's a different calculation sometimes.
I suppose. I mean, I'm in general agreement with what both David and Frank have said, and combining those things together, I'm thinking about the pressure that I felt when I was a student at Curtis, which was actually a very good orchestral program. It was a very intensive training, and we also did have an excellent conducting teacher, Otto Werner Mueller. He was incredible. And there was a lab orchestra, so a conducting department where we were able to study what it's like to be a conductor, what it's like to prepare a score, or to prepare to conduct an orchestra. And it was, all of us loved to go and watch, even when we weren't playing. It was immersive, and it was really intense, and there was a lot of discipline, and it was a lot of pressure. But it was still, both of what you guys have been mentioning so far, there was still an emphasis. At that point in time, I was playing piles of chamber music, focusing some on my own solo stuff, although I wasn't as interested in that. I was already interested in orchestral rep and opera at that point in time. And it was a place that allowed me to do that. There was still a little bit of space to make decisions as to what it was that I wanted to work on, and how I wanted to do it. And I feel that over the years, it's getting more and more intense and more challenging for institutions, because of numbers and because of competition, to produce and generate students that are successful in order to have the right numbers to appeal to people to give money and to continue to propagate the system. And of course, I totally understand that dilemma, but the students are also feeling that pressure, and the teachers too, to generate successful students. And so what I'm seeing more and more, and the more I teach, young professionals and midlife professionals also who are auditioning and wanting to get on sub lists, the more I feel that they're aiming for success rather than personal fulfillment from what they're doing. And so, to Frank's point about that, finding a very personal approach or a reason for doing what you're doing, and having an institution that can help you to find that, where that's the main goal. I think that's incredibly important for institutions to remember, but also for teachers and for students to remember that it's about that. Because when you end up in a pandemic and you have no work and you're wondering why you have a violin sitting in a case, you have to think about what it's all about. And there's a lot of time for me right now as a an aspiring musician again, I guess, to think about why I'm doing this. And I've been going back a lot in my memory to those days and what gifts I was given in my schooling. So I hope that we can all start to inject more of that kind of mentality in the mock audition process through teaching, just to get the students focused on score reading, and listening to multiple recordings, and then playing and immersing with other players as well. But I feel like there's a lot of work to be done to keep the standard up. Yeah.
Thank you for all that. I want to tie something you just said into a point David raised right at the beginning. So this picture gets very complicated now, because on the one hand, David feels that certain types of preparation are not what they could be. And I think what Ben is saying is also very true, that there's an emphasis on results and on the appearances of plugging students into this program, so that we're covering all the bases in school. But David, wouldn't you agree that it's very possible to drill in all the excerpts in a very exhaustive way and still kind of forget the ingredient of why we're doing it, the love of the actual music itself, where concentrating on excerpts can become a little bit of a test in itself, rather than placed into the proper context of being just that, excerpts from great pieces of music? How do we overcome that?
I've been accused here at home quite a bit of being super practical. So for me, it's always about let's get to college and let's start preparing to get a job, right away. I'm very practical minded. But that being said, I don't know. I feel like when you're auditioning for an orchestra, you also have your Mozart concerto, your romantic concerto. You might practice a little bit of sight reading. Sometimes there's a little chamber music with some of the other principals in the finals and all that. So I don't know. I feel a little bit more optimistic that in the training, there's plenty of opportunity to kind of sow your wild oats.
I see conservatory violinists going wild. I love that image.
Right.
We all have made this jump from completing our training and pursuing young careers in all kinds of different facets besides orchestra, and then doing orchestra full time. What do you see as kind of being the biggest gaps in knowledge or experience, both from your own experience and observing younger players come into your orchestras over the years? What sort of gaps do you see in that sort of realm?
Well, for me, I think of my starting phase in my violinistic career as being focused on solo stuff. Doing a lot of competitions, doing a lot of things that I thought would help me develop a solo career. And if I had not stumbled onto chamber music, for example, like quartet playing specifically, let's say, that I think I would not have enjoyed music as much as I do now. Even with the orchestra playing that I'm doing and the solo stuff that I did, without that intensive, dedicated period of my life to quartet world, that kind of attention to detail, like every little thing has to be in the right place. The people in the group have to be feeling the music the same way. It really made everything else, solo playing and orchestra playing, more fun for me. So I see occasionally, it's not so often these days, I think, but occasionally you see these really talented soloistic players that are going from competitions to auditions for orchestra. And occasionally what I miss from these certain types of players is the ability to hear and respond instantaneously to what's going on. You have your own vision and you're so focused on it. And while it could be great, it could sound amazing, if you're not constantly adaptable and in tune with what's going on, you might have a hard time in an orchestra. So that kind of awareness is something that I look for a lot. And chamber music experience on any level, but a more professional level is kind of if you're talking about gaps, that's something I see occasionally.
Yeah, there is that kind of phenomenon of being able to, and I guess it relates to what you say about competition style players. There is a certain profile of player that can just knock an audition dead, but has maybe a harder time playing together with colleagues. And it's I always find, and I don't have any qualms about being very honest here. It's like I can play the first page of Don Juan to a certain standard of technical accomplishment in my own timing.
Right.
But when it comes to playing with 100 colleagues, you sometimes have to let some of that stuff go because it's just, you don't have the luxury of your own timing when you're in actual performance with 100 colleagues on stage. You have to just kind of go with the tide. Well, Ben, what do you think about that? How do you
I
strike the balance between your own accomplishment and fitting it in with everyone else?
I don't think there's any substitute for that experience, and I think it has to start early on. I also benefited from a lot of chamber music experience towards the end of my schooling. I actually failed solfege in 1 year, sort of by design, because I wanted to stay another year at Curtis and just play chamber music, which is what I did anyway. It's a long story, not worth telling here, but I ended up playing in like 8 chamber groups that following year and tons of orchestra stuff. And that was all I had to do. And it was such a wonderful time not to have any other concerns in the world. I had a few lessons, not even full-time lessons at that point. I was just immersing in chamber music. And anyway, I think that's really beneficial because you hear a lot of people play excerpts and a lot of people go into audition settings, even that people who are able to almost pull the wool over your eyes with their ability to play these particular excerpts, but you're not totally sure whether they're going to be able to do anything else.
Absolutely, yeah.
And then you start to have to rely on the tenure process, and that gets stressful for everyone because, for obvious reasons, it's just not something anybody wants to do. You want to support your colleague once you've brought them into your group. So there is a gap, and I think my personal feeling is that there's no substitute for experience.
Well, maybe that's as good a time as any to kind of bring up what we're doing in the Montclair Orchestra, which is to have conservatory students play alongside leading professionals, many of them from Lincoln Center. And David, we worked together, well, many times, but also in a setting where it was essentially a student orchestra with faculty principals or faculty scattered around the orchestra. I think Montclair takes it one step further by having nearly a 50-50 composition. So I know for myself, as a student in Aspen, I learned a lot by watching my faculty principal. But depending on where I was sitting, that person could be very far away. And in Montclair, we try to have it so even if you're a string player, where you don't have the one-on-one benefit of a woodwind player, you still have somebody right in front of you or right behind you or next to you or at most 2 stands away, but not like 10 stands away. And so do you see any possible benefits of this sort of experience, like while you're still in school, as opposed to like, say, New World Symphony or Chicago Civic, which are for postgraduates? They have to audition for those programs. But while you're still in school, knowing that you're not a finished product, I mean, none of us ever really are, of course, but what would the benefits be for students to getting that experience while they're still putting things together?
Well, I think it's beneficial at many different stages. I'm sure. I'm not sure about Met, but at New York Philharmonic, do you guys do a side by side at some point?
Sometimes, yeah.
Yeah. So we do side by sides with all the different youth orchestras that are in Philly. There's so many, and at that point when they're in high school, they're so bashful, and they're kind of sitting there, kind of completely not speaking and not really making eye contact and everything. But I think there is something just by osmosis, and I always try to whisper a lot to whoever my stand partner ends up being. And then maybe a little bit later, once you're into college, it would be so great if we gave these kids these kind of opportunities. But I think they do more for, maybe things like the New York String Seminar at Christmas time, but it's hard to get in. Maybe some summer festival opportunities like David, you and I have done, and Frank. So, I think it's, if it's possible, not to make it like, oh, I remember in 1999, I got to do that once, but kind of like even if it's once every year or two, the opportunity to do that and have a few rehearsals and a concert experience. It can be life transforming, I think, for some of these kids. I can see it.
I'll go counterclockwise around the Zoom now just to change up the order. Ben, I see you nodding. Do you remember like formative experiences where you were playing along somebody, even if they weren't officially a mentor, that kind of just even observing the way they went about their business, you were like, that's like what I have to aspire to?
Absolutely. I mean, the salt and pepper of it is so incredibly important. I mean, to go into a New York String Seminar situation or whatever with similar age groups is likewise very valuable on a lot of levels, but going in with some older seasoned veterans can be really beneficial for obvious reasons. Yeah, power of observation, but also just hanging out with these people and seeing how they do their business every day. My first professional orchestra gig was stand 10 inside second violins, Philadelphia Orchestra, Gura leader Simon Rattle, 1999, maybe 2000, so around that time. And it blew my head off. I mean, it was just absolutely, I've been playing in Curtis Symphony.
It's very loud.
I was way in the back, right near the piccolo. And no, it was just phenomenal to be, I was sitting next to a guy, I think he was in his last, I don't remember his name, unfortunately. He was in his last season. He'd been there for 154 years or something like that. And he just, we were completely at different poles of our lives. And it was just so interesting to see how he managed himself physically and how he fit, how he chose to participate, and what was how he made himself most useful. And I was just so excited about everything, and I was so anxious, and so it was kind of jarring at first, but it just the observation of even being at the back of a group like that and watching these people who do this have been doing it for generations, this organism, was just so inspiring, and it just taught me a lot instantly about what it's like to play in an orchestra. But I think I was lucky to be back there. But a program where you have a regular thing where you're mixing age groups together, I think is incredibly valuable for those reasons. It's not so much even about mentorship as much as it is about just osmosis, really. Yeah.
I think it's very interesting, your choice of wording, which is very apt, like how he chose to participate. Like it's not that it wasn't about the music, it was, but it's like not even the playing itself. It's like everything that surrounds the playing. I might go, Frank, I might ask even one step further. What are the sorts of like non-musical things that yet still play such a big role in how we work together? As I see you laughing already. But honestly, I think sometimes the biggest learning experiences at Montclair rehearsals are maybe not even while we're playing. I think it's at coffee and donut time. Could really be just like people who never have the chance to be in a room with certain people, and all of a sudden they're there, and they may not even be talking about their instruments or music, but just like realizing that so and so that I've looked up to for a long time is a person just like me is like a really valuable realization, right?
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. I was laughing when you're talking about all these non-musical things, because we've had some conversations in my orchestra with some new hires in the past few years about etiquette, like orchestral, like 101, like how to be a good stand partner, for example, how to not block your stand partner's space, like how to give them enough room, how to mark things in the music that aren't gonna annoy whoever else is looking at it. All these things. I think people, younger kids, I certainly didn't think about these things when I was little. If the conductor said something, I would just mark something in the music, not thinking, oh, maybe this is unclear, maybe my handwriting is terrible, which it usually is. There's a lot of basic things there. We had there's a very small chance this person would be watching this, but we had one person who had severe problems with foot tapping while playing, and it was bothering everybody around him because it wouldn't always be with the pulse. And sticking your legs out, like just being very relaxed in your physical demeanor, things like that. I think in a semi-professional orchestra, you would, just being there for a few rehearsals or a concert, a lot of these things you would pick up, I would guess, instantaneously, watching how these so-called professional musicians handle these things.
Yeah.
But I have to say, there are a lot of professional musicians that are also very casual and relaxed. So, these kids may be picking up some bad habits as well. You you never know what you can learn.
Well, I think we do make an effort to invite professionals who would set a good example. But I actually think it's been, education, as I think you all agree, as teachers, it's a two-way street. As a teacher, I'm often learning so much by observing my students and interacting with them. It would be really a fallacy to pretend that I'm doing all the teaching. I'm often feeling like I'm the student, and I think in that sense also the professional mentors, they have a sense of responsibility, so they're probably thinking hard about what they're conveying at that moment. Yeah, David, this can be kind of just a humorous round, since Frank was talking about like foot tapping and like blocking the stand. Do do you have like your own kind of most classic etiquette breach? Like mine, I'll just volunteer. It's like I never have a pencil. I just always forget to have a pencil. If I bring a pencil, I leave it somewhere and then it's gone. So that one's really easy for me. Do you have like a common faux pas that you commit, or are you just perfect?
No, it's very, very trivial. But as we're all touring, we buy these, especially in Japan. There's Itoya, the famous like 7-story pencil shop. It's just amazing stationery stuff. We've all been there, and we all buy these beautiful, like it's like artwork. These pencils. I have such terrible butterfingers, and our music director Yannick, all three of us are. I don't know if you guys know this yet, but he doesn't like it when you write too much. And unfortunately, I write a lot. I write everything. So, like, he'll just kind of maybe turn towards the violas to say something or cello, and I'll just reach over very quickly, and I'll be like, but then I drop my pencil all the time, and sometimes it'll go in the crack and go down into the pit, and sometimes it'll go all the way roll over to the violas. I mean, it's crazy stuff. And sometimes my stand partner, Juliet, looks at me like, really? I mean, are you that Butterfinger? So that's my breach. But, I have to say, I'm sad to say and embarrassed, but I'm willing to put it out there myself. I'm like, hey, I'm Concertmaster. If I want a man spread, I'm going to man spread, like stuff like that. A little bit of that is in my brain, and then I have to catch myself. I'm like, okay, just sit up straight, stop mugging at somebody in the bass section, and, what are we drinking after the concert? That kind of stuff, happens all the time.
But, you're being humorous now, but I think actually that's important for students and aspiring professionals to realize too, is that as much as you want to push yourself hard and have the best possible professional deportment and whatever, that just being human and being a regular guy is important as well. That you don't have to be uptight about it. You can be professional and respectful and prepared and ultra on point with everything, and still be relaxed and have a good time and make jokes with your colleagues, and that it isn't life or death, right?
But there's an art to it, and to try to figure out how far to go. So for my first 6-7 years in Philadelphia, starting in 1999 with Gura Leader, Ben, right. I was just absolutely so uptight and so uncomfortable in my own skin. And we would go on tour, and it was torture because I was alone and I didn't have a gang to go out and find the best Xiaolong Bao with. I mean, it was just sad. And then when I started realizing that, what, people want you to just be yourself too. And, you have a pretty good sense of humor, just kind of relax a little. I mean, right away, my whole orchestra life changed. And so, but then there have been moments where I've maybe made a little off-color joke, and then that's not appropriate. So you got to kind of toe the line between, being a good guy, but also being a little bit corporate. And it's quite an art. And I'm certainly still learning it. Sometimes I forget to turn on the filter.
Anyone else?
It's fun. I want to ask you guys if you're Butterfingers too, because for me, I am too, but only when I'm playing. I drop the pencil. I'm working and I want to mark something in, and I can't see. I wonder if it's about something in the physical paradigm of things from while playing. I'll write something and I'm always dropping my pencil too. I can't think of another breach though. I got to start asking my colleagues around about this, or maybe David, we could sort of help each other out. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I think for me, I'm not Butterfingers, but I'm a general klutz. I crash into stuff. So enough that at home my family wonders how I'm coordinated enough to play past first position.
Right.
It is an open question.
Another thing I remember is talking about being human, and just not being scared to just be yourself. I remember getting so many comments when I first came, from audience members, like saying, you really look like you're having too much fun. Like you're always like smiling and laughing and looking at other people. Like, are you supposed to be doing that? Like, aren't you supposed to be like really serious and paying attention to the conductor? And, just isn't this like aren't you doing a bad job by having so much fun? And I remember when I really sat back and looked at it, I do have a lot of fun, like on stage, and playing in orchestra, especially with with a good orchestra, good colleagues that a lot of them become good friends. Um, most of us see our colleagues more than our family, like in a normal situation, unlike now, right? So these people become such close friends, and it's hard not to have fun on stage. And I couldn't believe that that was a bad thing, and I still refuse to believe. You guys, I mean, in the pit, it's a slightly different situation. If you guys are making silly faces and goofing off, no one can really tell.
When we're on the stage of Carnegie, I sometimes have to remind myself we're not in the pit.
I believe it. That would be a tough thing for me to make that adjustment.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned the situation now. This is a little bit of a tougher question, but I think in any given time, it's not easy to come out of conservatory and try to make a career in music, right? I mean, I have, with almost every graduating second year master's student, I have the lesson that's at Starbucks rather than in the studio, where they're desperate to talk about what am I going to do next year. And so what kind of encouraging words would you have for somebody who's in that boat right now, who's either graduating or it's coming up soon? Of course, none of us know what it's going to look like on the other side of this, but what sort of encouragement would you offer them?
It's a tough question.
I see your face.
Well, my mouth is moving first. I don't know. And I would just say be patient and, just keep slugging away at it. I'm really curious at this round table about what ages you guys all were when you got your first big concertmaster job. I've had several concertmaster jobs throughout the years. I've learned from a lot of them, but the Met, I was 37, and I'd had a lot of successes and a lot of failures along the way, a lot of varied income for a really long time. And that's okay. I had, my first year out of school, I chose not to take auditions. I moved to Toronto because I had a good, group of friends up there. Studied with the late Lauren Fenevesh briefly, but I was using that as a tether, really. And I started playing on the streets. I was actually jamming in the St. Lawrence Market, which is a really beautiful indoor food market, goes crazy on Saturdays. And I would just busk for hours and read quartets with friends, and we'd drink away the money and have, pay sort of some of the rent with that. And that's how I started off. It took me a while to get on my feet, but I found a way to survive. I mean, once you have the skills and once you've been honing these things for decades, as we all have, or, it's, you can do something with it and you can find a way to survive, but just keep focusing. And whether it's from one year to the next at university or whether it's after you were gone from school, I think it's just a matter of just taking things in step with where you need to be rather than trying to make leaps.
David, what would you add?
Oh, I absolutely agree with Ben. I think that, I can speak with the most authority of myself, and I didn't decide to go into an orchestra life until I was like almost in my mid-30s. So, in other words, way later than I should have known. I should have known better earlier, but I was like still waiting for that big break or the call or whatever. But I can say that the audition process, and I'm sure that all four of us can agree that the audition process is so difficult, going through all of those rounds. And then I don't know about you guys, but I had to do a trial period, 2 weeks, including Carnegie, and just all of that together. I just feel like if one of those gigs that I hadn't done, or like, I don't know, I said I was an expert at everything through those years in my 20s and 30s. I said, oh yeah, I'm an expert in Suzuki violin teaching, but I'd never done Suzuki. Or I'm good at strolling violin, and I would stroll at FAO Schwartz or a restaurant or something like that. I just did everything. I said yes to everything. And I taught, and I played in a chamber music group. And then I just feel like eventually when it was time to really prove myself under the highest pressure, I just feel like I couldn't have traded even one of those experiences. They all helped me kind of somehow navigate that difficult audition process. All those experiences and all that pressure kind of came back to help me.
That's so true. I remember a really bad gig I did, which involved a very long bus ride to Eastern Long Island, and it was outdoors, and it was not my favorite style of music, et cetera, et cetera. But I think even just observing people who were in the profession, what it meant to work for a living really meant something. It's like so different than like a young aspiring violin soloist vision of playing a concerto at Carnegie Hall. It was like, this is real life. This is like, what it means to work for a living was a valuable thing, and it was as much a part of my education as playing concertmaster of a chamber orchestra, as playing a concerto somewhere, as playing, you could go down the list, but that was just one little piece, but it contributed to my growth, and it was part of, my years out of school before I landed a job, that kind of general education of, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So Frank, any words from your end?
Well, I'm trying to think about the positives of our current situation. If I were in college right now during this time, I think it would be tough to be, if this was like your senior year or something, right? Or if this was like your even high school, like I don't know if like all your things you're looking forward to were canceled. But as a musician, if I think about it, there's a certain part of me that would have loved to have a few months where I couldn't do anything except practice, for example, like no classes in a relevant way. Like, I mean, obviously maybe Zoom classes are going, but just having a lot of time to practice and focus on what is coming up. Hopefully when all this is over, we're kind of all hoping and assuming someday things might get back to the way they used to be, at least being able to play music together, hopefully on a stage. But if you use this time, like Ben was saying, and just keep preparing and use it well, there might be even a lot of opportunities once orchestras start working again. Maybe a lot of people will decide to retire. Maybe there will be a sudden like unprecedented amount of openings in orchestras. That could be a great advantage for these new this new generation of musicians. So you never know what can happen, but using this time well could prepare you for opportunities.
Very wise words from all of you. And yeah, I mean, unless any of you have anything else to add, I think we can wrap up our discussion for today. I'm very grateful to all of you, kind of pillars of your respective institutions, great musicians and leaders, all of you. So thank you for being on the show, so to speak, today.
Thanks for having us, Dave. This was really fun. Thank you.
David, I have a question for you.
Yeah.
Relating to Montclair, like how has your conducting developed due to this orchestra, and how do you see a big difference when there are more quote unquote professional musicians versus maybe there's some program where it's mostly students? Like, do you sense any difference? Does it affect the way you conduct? Does it affect the way you rehearse?
That's a very interesting question. I think it does affect what I do to some extent, because with a strong student component, you can make a part of conducting which is often implicit, you can make it overt. And that's the teaching aspect. And whether we like it or not as professional orchestral players, conducting has a strong teaching component because you're trying to get highly skilled, highly talented, and in the case of professional orchestras, highly experienced players to do something they aren't already doing. So you're getting them to consider something they haven't considered or to do something differently than they're currently doing. And you can like 99.9% of what they're offering you already, but you want to change that one thing. When you have a big student component, that implicit part of conducting is now made overt. Now you have kind of the license to speak in a slightly more teaching manner, not to the point of irritating your professional colleagues, but you can make a little bit more obvious that this is a lesson you want certain people to get from this experience. And so I've, in my relatively brief conducting career, I've conducted everything from amateur orchestras to 100% student orchestra to half and half student professional to 100% professional. And I would say anytime you have the strong student component to the amateurs, you can approach it that way, and they welcome that. That's they're thirsting for that. When you go to the 100% professional orchestra, obviously the music doesn't change one iota. You can take more risks with what you show and don't show, obviously, because the players have more experience with the music. But ultimately, what you say is still the same. It's just the choice of wording and maybe the quantity of it is different with the full-time professionals. Does that ring true for you?
Yeah, well, as you know, I'm super interested in all things relating to conducting as an art form. It's, all of us, we get to see so many great and sometimes not so great conductors, and it's such a fascinating thing for me to see what works and what doesn't work. Personality is a huge part of it, right? Charisma. Someone very charming could get away with things that someone very unlikable could not get away with sometimes. But I talking with David about conducting is always fascinating for me, and the few micro conducting lessons that you offered still stay with me to this day.
Chicken drumstick in hand.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you all again.
This was fun.
It's an incredible pleasure to see you and chat with you. And I guess in this sense, we really have to be grateful for the world situation that the four of us can clear out a Tuesday afternoon to chat together.
Yeah.
Thank you, David Kim, Ben Bowman, Frank Huang. Thank you for being on the show today. And let's do it again.
Okay,
It was a
anytime.
pleasure. Thanks, David.
Thanks.